Welcome to PharmaSource, recorded at CDMO Live 2025. This episode is brought to you by Qualifies, the platform that helps life science teams streamline audits and predict site risks with AI-driven insights.
Very pleased to welcome to the stage Joshi Venugopal. He's SVP and Head of Region for Novartis Gene Therapy, and he's going to be giving his perspective on the future of cell and gene and how we can do it better. Joshi.
Very good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here with the colleagues from the CDMO space, who forms the backbone of the cell and gene therapy sector. It so happens that the first and the second FDA-approved gene therapies, Luxturna and Zolgensma, happen to be in our portfolio at Novartis. So we had the opportunity to be the pioneers in introducing these innovative medicines in several countries and sense the opportunities and challenges firsthand. It is with this vantage point that I am going to look at the future of the gene therapy sector in particular, and I don't intend it to be definitive predictions, but more as an exploration of possibilities. If you look at technology and how it evolves over time and how expectations change, some patterns can be observed and grouped. On one end, you will see the expectations improving over time in a steady fashion, and you will see some examples of that. It doesn't mean that everything is hunky-dory in these situations. You may remember companies like MySpace go bust, but overall the sector has had a very positive trajectory without too much of ups and downs. And on the other hand, you can see technologies that comes with a big hope, and over time, the expectations trend downwards, and several examples over here. And in the middle, you see a typical Gartner's curve, which is a combination of both, where you will see a huge increase in expectations over a very short time, and then some disappointment happens, and then there is a huge lowering of expectations. And most people will move on to the next shiny object when at this stage, and few people will soldier on, and then the reality starts to kick in, which is somewhere between the peak of inflated expectations and the valley of disillusionment. Now, let me ask for you for a show of hands. And where do you think the gene therapy, and let's say broadly cell and gene therapy, fits? How many things in the first section? One person. How many things in the middle? That's what was majority. And how many things here? Okay, there's one or two here too. So you will see, like, vast majority of the people are of the opinion that cell and gene therapies are going through a typical Gartner's curve, which is what I also tend to believe. Then the most obvious questions is, in that curve, where are we today? What would it take to reach the plateau of productivity, and how long will this journey be? Now, trying to map a little bit where it is, this was the first case of a patient being treated with gene therapy for clinical trials. A girl called, I forgot her name, it's Asanti De Silva. Yeah, she was 4 years old. She was treated for SCID, and she's now 30 and an advocate for rare disease. So when you saw transformative potential for a very severe disease like SCID, that is when the expectations started to go up. And then there were many other progresses, and then headline-grabbing human genome projects, etc., really inflated the expectations. The hits started to come primarily with the safety issues. You may remember the Jesse Gelsinger case in the US. the Necker Institute-related safety issues in Paris, and then other safety issues has also come at an expense of the sentiment that this sector had. In between the first FDA-approved gene therapy, which was Luxturna for rare retinal disorders with RPE65 mutations, were launched with a lot of fanfare, but commercially it was not very successful. The companies that were involved all took big impairments following the business development and licensing deals. So the question was, okay, we like the technology, we know individually it can make a big difference to patient life, but is that commercially viable? Can we do this at scale? And that was a big question mark, along with the safety issues, etc., on the field. The pivotal turning point, in my opinion, came when we had the first blockbuster, Zolgensma for spinal muscular atrophy, and that showed that it is commercially viable, and then that is where we are today, and let's see what will it take. So I am going to talk about 3 inflection points. The first one is on routine whole genome sequencing. If you look at the gene therapies that are relatively successful versus the others that are not, one common linkage factor is the diagnosis. Especially in spinal muscular atrophy for Zolgensma, the ability to have newborn screening, where every newborn in a country is screened for this disorder, and the patients identified, was very critical for its success. If you look at the newborn screening map in Europe, you can see it is very different from country to country. Italy leads with almost 60 conditions being screened, and you can see there are several countries with low single digits of conditions screened, right? So that's how it is done, case by case, country by country. Now, what can change this is the idea of a whole genome sequencing for the newborns. And this is not just a concept, it is being piloted, at least 9 pilots that we know of, including in the UK, where 100,000 newborns will be screened for 250 conditions. Now, it has a lot of benefits. First of all, you don't have to do individual analysis. You can do large number of disease screenings at one go. You can add diseases to the screen much easily as opposed to right now. The disparities can go down. We can have a lot of data. We can identify patients for clinical trials early on, etc. But on the other hand, it also causes a lot of concerns. Data privacy is a question, ethics. It takes more time to get the results compared to several newborn screening. And time is sometimes very important when it comes to some of these diseases. Cost effectiveness. And then there is a question of, what do you do with all these data? What if somebody told you you have 30% chance of getting this disease and getting that disease? Would we be able to deal with all the stress and anxiety that it causes? And will the healthcare systems be able to counsel and treat people who are diagnosed with this big screening effort? So all these things would have to be figured out, but this is one big inflection point that would help all these companies. Many companies, especially smaller companies who have products in gene therapy space, really struggle to institute national newborn screening for their disease country by country, but this would rapidly increase the diagnosis across disease conditions. The second inflection point is technology. If you look at the current gene therapy space, most of them are for rare diseases. They're for very severe, caused by single genes. They are targeting cells that have stopped dividing, like neurons. They don't regenerate, and they have very high unit costs. The question is, can you move up this dial? And if so, that would be a big opportunity. Now, if you look at the clinical trials that are happening in the gene therapy space, the biggest number of clinical trials happen in eye disorders, which is a little bit strange, because if you look at the small molecules or antibodies, the ophthalmology research pipeline, it's a very small percentage, right? But for gene therapy, it is very high. Why? If you go back here, many eye diseases can be prevalent. For example, let's compare spinal muscular atrophy to geographic atrophy, which is an eye disorder. It is 30 times more. If you compare that with wet AMD, it's 500 times more. If it's compared that with dry AMD, it's 5,000 times more. So it is much more prevalent diseases than what we are currently treating. So that is the appeal of the eye. And they don't have to be super severe like metachromatic leukomuscular dystrophy and things like that. Many of these diseases are polygenic, like AMD. There are so many things that are causing it, VEGF, this, that. Geographic atrophy, so many complement factors are involved. So it's not monogenic. And they are also, the unit cost will be very low. You remember, for the eye, you need very little amount compared to the systemic IV treatments. So this is why moving that dial up will initially happen with the current technologies, but mostly in these kind of sense organ disorders. But then the technology will move, we believe, more into other prevalent disorders and other disease systems. And manufacturing will be a big part of it. There is a lot on the upstream process intensification, moving to suspension cell lines instead of adherent cell lines. You can have genetic engineering of the host cells so that you don't have to do transient transfections, automated closed systems to improve quality, speed, and the AI-enabled analytics for detecting, for example, empty capsids, etc. So this is where I think is going to be the low-hanging fruit. And of course, then the vector enhancement, both viral and non-viral vectors, is also interesting. With safety, tissue trophism cause larger cargo and redosing. Especially with non-viral vectors who do not elicit immune response, the ability to redose will change the paradigm of gene therapy. It doesn't have to be a one-time therapy. It can be once every 3-year therapy or once every 5-year therapy. And of course, gene editing offers several advantages that the gene replacement therapies do not have, and I'm not going to go through them one by one. Now, having said all this, if you look at what is in the pipeline right now, the majority of medicines out there are still viral vectors, AAV9 or other AAVs or lentiviral vectors. So if you look at what is going to read out in the next 3-5 years, they are still going to be majority viral vectors. And that is why I feel the manufacturing-related improvements with the current technology is going to be what is going to make the biggest impact short to mid-term. The other improvements, including the vector enhancements, will probably take more time to manifest given the timelines it takes for the drugs to go through the clinical trial system. The third and the final inflection point I'm going to talk about is about commercialization. This is a map of the companies in the gene therapy area, and you can see there's a critical mass of companies in Europe, but the majority of the activities happens in the United States and to some degree in China. Now, what is interesting is roughly 30 to 35% of the products that are approved by the US FDA are not even launched in Europe. And there is this notion in the biotech sector that Europe is not a very attractive market. It's all about the US, and Europe mostly comes as an afterthought. Let me beg to differ on that, and let me tell you why. If you look at the population of Europe, Europe have twice as many people and by definition twice as many patients. So the volume is there. Now, we know that the Europe has a price discount compared to US, but for rare diseases, the discounts tend to be lower than for non-rare. So typically it's 50 the worst case and the best case 75. That's the range of the discounts you have compared to the US pricing. So if you can get to the volume in Europe, but have at the higher range, you should have a bigger market in Europe than US. Simple mathematics. And there are gene therapies where the European sales are higher than the US sales. It's not disclose most of the time, but it's important for you to remember. Now, why does most companies don't realize this potential? It's partly because some of those companies do not launch. And for those who launch, they stick to a few markets in Europe, mostly the EU5. Usual suspects being Germany, France, Italy, and sometimes UK, Spain. That's where most of these companies go, and sometimes Russia, depending if it's pediatric or not. So that's why most of the companies who go to Europe only go to a few countries, that is probably half of the Europe's total population, and that is why the potential is also not realized. So what can we do about it? One of the reasons Zolgensma was successful is because we went very broad. We have access in more than 30 countries in Europe, including in countries with middle income status. And therefore, partnering with pharma is one real opportunity for the biotechs. And the pharma has a big footprint, and they can commercialize the products very broadly. However, pharma can only absorb a few products from the biotech pipeline in gene therapy, partly because the economics for the pharma works slightly differently. And let me skip in the interest of time. I'll focus on this chart. This is a chart where you can see all dots are different big pharma companies. I've taken the names not to antagonize anybody. And this is a shareholder return over a decade. And this axis shows what percentage of the sales come from very large products. And this shows what comes from small products. And you can see the more the sales come from large products, the better shareholder returns. So that's why big pharma intuitively wants very large products. And a lot of rare disease products do not hit the bar for the revenue size that big pharma likes. So there will be a lot of products that would not be attractive for the big pharma, and we need to find a way to commercialize it, and not every biotech company has the ability to do so. This is why I believe there is a huge opportunity for commercial entities that can become the commercial engines for bringing gene therapy and high-end ATMP products into Europe, Japan, and few selective markets in the Middle East and Asia. And those companies are starting to come, like, if you look at Sobi as an example, but there are very few of them, and you need more specialized companies like that, and that is going to come, and that will provide an inflection point to the sector as well. So just to sum up, I believe the three inflection points that we mentioned before, that includes the routine whole genome sequencing, the advent of technology to improve the risk-benefit profile and the cost, and having commercial vehicles to launch the gene therapy, the huge amount of gene therapy products that are coming into the pipeline. These three will help us to get closer to the plateau productivity, which often would take 10 to 15 years in our estimation. With that, I just want to say that it is all the confluence of all of these things that will really help the sector to reach where we all want it to be. And with that, I would like to thank you for your pleasant hearing. Thank you.
For more external manufacturing insights, head to cdmolive.com and download our 50-page summary of the event. Make sure to book your ticket for CDMO Live 2026, taking place the 27th to 28th of May at the World Trade Center, Rotterdam. We look forward to seeing you there.